Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch and even better conversations. We're now ready for the final section of today's program. It's titled, It's Time for Asia to Win the Climate Technology and Innovation Race. Once again, please note that you do have translations available, and you can see the channels listed on the screen behind me. I would now like to invite my colleague at Bloomberg, Steven Stupczynski. He's our Asia Energy Team Leader, back to the stage to moderate the next panel, the Green Tech Forecast, What is the Future of Asia's Climate Technology Landscape?
Thank you. Thank you, Ishika. Hello again, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. The post-lunch session is about to begin. The best session, I like to say. For our next panel, we have an excellent lineup of speakers to shed light on Asia's climate technology landscape and opportunities it holds. First up, let me please introduce Gina Domanig. Gina is the founder and managing partner of Emerald Technologies Ventures. Emerald is a globally recognized venture capital firm building a sustainable future at the crossroads of industry and technology. Please join me on stage. Next, we have Martijn Hoogerwerf, the head of Sustainable Solutions Group for APAC at ING. At ING, he is responsible for originating and structuring sustainable finance transactions across the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you for joining. Applause. Thank you. And finally, we have Seonghoon Woo, CEO and co-founder of Amogy, a scientist and entrepreneur dedicated to decarbonizing heavy industries through innovative ammonia to power technologies. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining me today on this post-lunch panel. I really appreciate it. Asia's technology landscape has never been just hypothetical. It operates by the need to deliver impactful results that can change the world. So I would like to start with an opening question to each of you that we can just kind of go through. Asia has long been a hub of technological innovation. Are there any climate technologies you have seen in recent years that you think are total game changers? Gina, let's start with you.
So thanks for the question. I think it's difficult to put Asia in one bucket, right? We invest in Japan, Southeast Asia, India, so all the way take APAC in Australia. So I would say that one thing I think is very interesting is decentralized wastewater treatment in India, right? Looking at the wastewater challenges that they have there, the reliance that industrial companies have on clean water. So we've seen some very interesting technologies come out that are very specific for that type of environment that we think that we can also help to bring into other geographies in the world.
That's great. Martijn, let's go to you with the same question.
Yeah, and maybe for context, ING, certainly here in the region, we're a wholesale bank. And the way you got to think about a bank is we're very risk averse. We're not sort of, an Emerald Technology Ventures who takes early stage risk. We look at projects that are lower risk and so-called bankable. And when I think about where we are deploying our technology, our capital, so our low risk capital, it's in renewable energy, right? We have a full-fledged team across the region here to finance renewable energy projects. It might be a bit of a traditional answer, but that is where the big capital is going at the moment, of course. And tied into that, we see opportunities in energy storage, for example. So we, as a bank, again, low risk capital going into energy storage projects. So these are some of the more mature climate technologies that we see in the market.
I'm just curious, where are you seeing opportunities for storage in Asia? Is there where the kind of I hear a lot about Australia, but what about Southeast Asia, India, North Asia? Where are you seeing the real action there?
I think it's mostly in Australia.
Yeah.
From what I can tell. Yeah.
What's driving that, do you think?
Regulations, policies. I think it's incredibly important when we speak to our clients, you think about large, carbon-intensive clients that we try to incentivize to decarbonize. That's our remit as a bank, and we structure sustainable finance products for these clients. And often we hear about their challenges on how to decarbonize and transition. And often the answer is, government policies, investments in infrastructure to de-bottleneck, if you will, the transition plans of our clients. And government policies is a big one in that.
Thank you, I couldn't resist. Thank you. And Seonghoon, what do you see as a game changer? Obviously, you're in the ammonia future fuels kind of space. What do you see as something that is a game changer in this region or in the world that you're looking at?
Sure. So first to briefly introduce the company, because many of you may not know, may have not heard about Amogy. So Amogy is actually a US-based startup company. So we have a predominant presence in the US, but of course we do the business here in Asia a lot as well, because we developed the ammonia to power technology so that we can use ammonia as a sustainable fuel in industries such as maritime shipping or the power generation. So we have many customers and shareholders and partners present in Asia, primarily in Singapore, Japan, and Korea, because those countries are net energy importers and they don't unfortunately have the abundant renewable energy. So they have to import the energy like ammonia to decarbonize the shipping or the power generation. So we are heavily working together with them. So what's been really impressive, at least from our perspective, is really the rapid pace of the cost curve down. So we see
for ammonia.
Yeah, for ammonia as well. When it comes to like ammonia to power, so we essentially build the physical like hardware technologies. So we can do that first, like the prototyping and innovation based in the US, but to really make it cost competitive in the market, then we work heavily together with the Asian partners and the industry players, because they know how to make it cheaper. They know how to make it more mature and advanced to really be used in the heavy industries. So what's been really helpful for our journey is really that tight collaboration, so that we can come up with this first solution in innovation, then our partners and us together can really make it even more competitive so that we can accelerate the commercialization of this technology.
For ammonia, do you see, and when we're talking about the cost curve, when do you see it being competitive theoretically with fossil fuels for a country like Japan or Korea?
Sure. I think there are two pieces there. One is, of course, we are developing the technology like hardware, CapEx. So we are focused on making this hardware as cheap as possible, competitive to like diesel genset of today. And the other side, we have to make this molecule cheaply. So we have like shareholders, including Saudi Aramco, SK, and Mitsubishi. Basically, they are investing and developing the upstream side of making the ammonia cheaply. So for example, when it comes to the ammonia, especially Japan and Korea, they are trying to import the blue ammonia to co-combust with the coal, like coal power plant. So they are importing that blue ammonia mainly from like Gulf Coast or the Saudi Arabia, because they are producing blue ammonia very cheaply. So that already started being implemented into the commercial market from this year and next year, which is scaling up fast in terms of the volume of that blue ammonia. I say a lot blue because I still believe the green ammonia is going to be taking a little bit longer to be cost competitive. But we have a good solution in the beginning so that we can use the molecule and then we can make it more sustainable over time.
That's fascinating. You're really on the forefront of that future fuel rush. Gina, let me go back to you. Emerald is one of the organizers behind the Asia Climate Tech Venture Fair, bringing together 130 investors from across the region to explore all things climate tech. What big trends are you seeing in that area, and which technologies are investors most excited about?
So this is a collaboration with VCs across the region to kind of help build the ecosystem. So again, talking to VCs from the different regions, I think if we look at the application area side, besides just energy, still the whole decarbonization, grid resilience, on the water side, there's a lot of issues on water. But if you look at application areas, I think data centers, and data centers is interesting because there's materials plays there, there's water issues, and of course there's energy issues. So how can we make data centers actually more economically efficient as well as environmentally more efficient? I think that's still a huge area right now. that everybody wants to talk about, right? So the topics this year are going to be about data centers and also people want to talk about nuclear again, right? So it's going to be, again, addressing the decarbonization path on energy in countries that are constrained from, Japan, Singapore. You can't, I just heard the other day, if you put solar panels on every roof in Singapore, it would still only be 10%, right? So they're going to, if they want to achieve their decarbonization goals, they need to look at other more efficient technologies, right?
You mentioned, I'm sorry.
Land-based, right?
You mentioned nuclear, and I realize that maybe not something that is ready for prime time in Asia, but is that something that is meaningfully picking up more interest? Are there opportunities for investment in nuclear technologies, or is it still? Do you think it makes sense to focus on other areas?
There have always been, right? And there are some VCs who have been in the background, financing these nuclear companies that are always 5 or 10 years away from commercialization. So for us, that's still a little bit too far out. But it is an area that I say we're taking more seriously today than we did 5 years ago, right? I think that still is really important. And also back to the topic of maritime. Yeah. I think maritime is still super important. People are still also on the aviation fuels. So this hard to abate sectors, I think, are still of interest. And that's one of the topics which is kind of the same, well, maybe not for the US today, but definitely in Europe and in Asia. It's still very, very topical.
Certainly. Thank you. Martijn, let's go to you really quick. ING has developed a strategy to incorporate its climate ambitions into different parts of its businesses. One part of this is financing technologies for a low carbon world. Given this commitment, what are most exciting opportunities in Asia's green tech landscape today? Are we talking about renewables, green mobility, hydrogen, nuclear, or something else?
Yeah, let me tilt that answer a little bit. We at ING, as I mentioned, we're a traditional wholesale bank. We have a 700 billion euro loan portfolio to sectors such as steel production, aviation, shipping, real estate. You can imagine that it's incredibly carbon intensive. And we made a commitment back in 2018 to start measuring the carbon intensity of that loan portfolio. So our emissions as a bank all sit in that financed portfolio, right? We're talking about 99% of our emissions, so that's scope 3 financed emissions. We made a commitment 8 years ago to start tracking that. We're very public about it, so you can go on our website, you can find annual reports, how we're progressing. We do this on a sector by sector basis. We do this in a science-based approach, and it allows us to steer our loan portfolio. Incredibly important theme because it's now embedded in our credit risk assessment process. It's embedded in our credit risk approval process. So we will look at a particular opportunity, a loan that our relationship manager wants to seek approval for. We'll look at where that sits vis-a-vis that decarbonization curve. On top of that, we developed a process to do client by client engagement on the transition of our clients, right? And this is a really important one because financial institutions really like to talk about engagement and continuing to be invested in opportunities, and we're really good at that, but the reality is, what does that engagement look like? What we do as a bank, we, on an annual basis, have a conversation with our clients on how they're transitioning. We give them a transition score. We want to understand what their challenges are, and interestingly enough, when you talk to a shipping company, they will talk about alternative fuels. And then, as a bank, we can see an opportunity to assist and support our clients in financing their transition, right? And it's not just one shipping company that talks about, for example, ammonia. It's a whole bunch of shipping companies, and that's really the role of a bank, I think, like ING.
Thank you for that. We got a question from the delegates pre-event, which I just want to go through. I think it's a good one. The question is, given the global shift towards unilateralism and the current geopolitical situation, how is it impacting investor confidence in policy momentum in Asia? Anyone happy to offer their thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to go. I mean, in my role, I speak to corporates, financial institutions across Asia Pacific. And certainly with the rise of geopolitical tensions, we have a very keen ear out for how our clients are responding to this. I've had zero clients talk to me about, hey, we're going to do something else now. Thank you. We don't want to talk about sustainability and transition anymore. There are, however, challenges, and one of the challenges related to the geopolitical tensions, of course, is economic impact. Yeah. That impacts CapEx plans for companies, so it's very difficult to plan in the first place, and that by itself then impacts also CapEx plans related to transition. So it has an impact, but it's not targeted at transition per se. There's an economic impact, economic uncertainty, and it's very difficult for companies, including banks, to do proper medium-term and longer-term planning. It just makes it really challenging, I think.
Gina,
yeah, I would agree. So in our funds, we've got about 60 industrial corporations that are invested in our funds. So they're really looking at us to help them find the technology, the innovative solutions, obviously to help them to achieve the targets that you mentioned. None of them have told us that they've changed their targets, but they have cut back on their budgets. But that's because of concerns about a recession or maybe the economic impact of tariffs. But it's not because one person doesn't like to hear the term climate, right? So I think that they're not changing their strategy, but we do see them putting on the brakes, and it's having an impact on the startup companies that are trying to work with them because they've got plans. Startups they've got one or two potential customers, and they've got a plan there to pilot, and they think if they achieve their targets, they're going to roll out. And then if all of a sudden the corporate says, "Oops, CFO said all discretionary things are kind of on ice right now," and it's amazing. I mean, some really, really big energy companies are starting to cut or at least indefinitely postpone some of these projects, not because of a lack of commitment to a strategy, but because of concern about their next quarterlies.
I mean, I'm going to use this as a segue to go to Seonghoon really quick. I mean, you're looking at companies like Shell or other big oil companies that years ago made big commitments into hydrogen, into ammonia, and they're sort of taking a step back from that. In this region in Australia, some projects have been delayed or put on ice. Are you seeing a shift from companies that would have previously supported you, or for projects that you were involved in? And do you see this as a temporary hiccup, or something that it's going to be a tone shift where you're going to have to find different kinds of partners and different kinds of allies?
Yeah, I mean, from what we see, we have investors including like Saudi Aramco, Amazon, Mitsubishi, SK, Samsung Heavy, and many other big corporates. So we certainly are exposed to many of these different dynamics we are observing as well. But as Gina mentioned, certainly the pace is changing. It's getting slower. However, I mean, they're like the North Star. I mean, their overall direction is not really changing. They are still, heavily committed to decarbonize their operations, whether it's 2045, 50, 55, could be changing. But from startups' perspective, because we are always fighting against the runway, so we have to continue to raise the money, do the pilot. But Amogy, in that context, we have been fortunate to be continuously supported by our investors as well, I mean, from the investment side as well as the pilot. So we are doing the pilots with our investors and customers so that we can showcase the technology even under the current geopolitics. And also when it comes to like hydrogen economy as a whole, so there are different segments of the hydrogen. So we certainly see the significant step back when it comes to like green hydrogen production. Right. But we also, however, ammonia, we see still the continuing momentum, especially when it comes to the ammonia as a fuel for like shipping and the power. Like Japanese governments and Korean governments, they put the regulation and policy to drive that ammonia adoption to decarbonize their coal power plant, for example. So there are areas in different sectors and molecules where we still see the momentum, and we are trying to take the best advantage of that.
And you're still seeing that support in Korea and Japan?
That's right. I mean, we are 90% based in the US. So we have been seeing that probably the early on when we started company based back in in the beginning of 2021. So we saw much more excitement probably from Europe and US with the IRA and other policies coming. But nowadays we see the continued momentum happening in East Asia, here in Singapore, Japan, and Korea as well. So we are trying to go to the market where we can best utilize the existing stakeholders and policies so that we can still advance our technology.
Can I just add, I think that's a super important point that he mentioned about the corporates, right?
Yeah.
We have to understand in the last 25 years, the composition of investors, right? We're VCs, we're not PE guys. We syndicate our deals, we're very interdependent, we are always working together. The percentage of corporate participation in these companies has dramatically increased. I think it's like every third investment in the climate tech space has at least one corporate in the syndicate, right? And what's really important is that these corporates stay the course, right? You've seen over the last couple of years, you've seen really big, pendulum swinging, Total Energies kind of completely gets out. Now the question is Shell selling their portfolio, right? And what happens then is that a startup company has, let's say, hopefully a large syndicate, right? And one or two start dropping out. It has nothing to do with the quality of the startup, right? It has to do with their internal budget cuts, right? And it's important that the startups have large and stable enough syndicates that they can afford to have some dropping out, because that's what happened to us in the last recession. We had so many really good startup companies going bankrupt because their investors were tapped out, right? Back then it wasn't so much the corporates, it was more the independent VCs were tapped out, and they had to triage, and they couldn't support all of their portfolio companies. And so if we were one of three investors in a company, right, we can't cover, if both of you drop out, I can't cover both of your pro ratas, right? Maybe one I can, right? So it's really important that in good times, the startups think about who's in their syndicate, hopefully people who have a strategic interest in seeing this thing all the way through to the end, because then it's hopefully less likely to get cut.
Talking about the corporates that have pulled back, you mentioned Total and Shell. Are we seeing this kind of pullback and this kind of U-turn mostly from these big oil energy companies, or are we also seeing it in the tech sector? Are you expecting the Amazons or the Googles or Alphabet to kind of take a step back, or is it not that at all? Just curious what you're seeing.
No, to us, it's those who are concerned about their next financial results.
Okay.
Right. So the chemical company, right? Look at the chemicals VCs, right? In Europe, I mean, they're not closing down, but they're not making many investments, right? Yeah. You can tell corporate has told them, hey, kind of no new investments, or just those that are super important to our core business.
I mean, what I find interesting is sort of the data center space, right? And you talked about the Googles and the Microsofts, and what we found is, as a bank, we try to incentivize our clients, data center companies, when we provide a loan to, use as little power or become as energy efficient as possible. But certainly there's been a massive pressure from the Microsofts and Googles on data centers, right? Because of the commitments that the Microsoft and Googles have. So I hope that commitment remains, because the data center space is obviously, uses a lot of energy and is growing rapidly.
I mean, and sorry, just kind of using that as another segue, we've had these companies make commitments very ambitious commitments to tech companies to make reductions in emissions. And those commitments were made before the whole data center boom, the AI boom. And I look at it, and in Asia, it's going to be challenging to hit those commitments and also meet the demand of the AI needed in Malaysia or Vietnam. Where does, innovative tech play into that? Is there an innovative tech? Is there a way to do this? Or are companies going to just have to compromise in the short term that they're not going to be able to hit these goals?
I think Amiro is going to be the same.
It's two-sided, right? I mean, first of all, it's going to be difficult for them to meet them. On the other side, it's going to create an incredible market demand for the startups who are coming up with solutions to reduce the water consumption, reduce the heat generation, more efficient cooling. So everything about water and energy efficiency will all of a sudden have a very, very strong market pool, which maybe we didn't experience a few years ago. So, it's on the one side, there's kind of the challenge of it, but it also creates opportunities because it creates a stronger market pool.
Can we go back to maybe ammonia production?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Because ammonia, I mean, it's interesting that we've had, as a bank, we've had many opportunities come to us for producers of ammonia, right? And the way to make these projects bankable is if there's offtake contracts with credible parties.
Yeah.
And we talked about the Japanese and Korean utilities.
Yeah.
Sure enough, they're very credible. Unlike the average shipping company tends to be a little bit less credit worthy, arguably. So on the back of an offtake contract with a Japanese utility, it could work that way. The challenge with that is, if it extends the lifetime of a coal-fired power plant, right? Because that's something that we should also avoid.
Well, let's hit that question head on, Seonghoon. How do you, there are arguments that co-firing with ammonia in Japan, 5%, 10%, does little to reduce emissions and in fact could actually increase greenhouse gas emissions when looking at the total supply chain. What is your response to that? I know you're not the one developing those projects, you're developing the technology, but still, how do you respond to that kind of criticism?
Yeah, our perspective on that is, we have to start from somewhere. We have to start from somewhere which is economical. So what I mean by that is if they were to have access to 100% emission reduction technology today with economics which works for them, they would have started with that technology for sure. But those technologies are not available yet. And companies like Amogy is developing and maturing the technology so that we can make it more competitive, economical. So we see that as a very positive development, to be honest, because Japanese and Korean governments are importing that much of the ammonia, they are building the infrastructure. Then it's basically making the playground for Amogy to come in, use the same infrastructure, scale of our technology and the deployment. Therefore, we can provide that zero emission solution when they have the access to our technology in the economic way. So we see, the same for the other side of the world as well, like European shippers, they are also building the bunkering and other types of the infrastructures for probably initially not super sustainable operations in the beginning. However, that is really setting the tone for the next technologies to come so that we can take advantage of that. So it's the evolution over time, which we sometimes feel like taking too long, but it's coming quickly. And we are trying our best to make that happen even quicker.
Certainly, you look at Europe and they all say that if you want to build a gas-fired power plant, it has to be ammonia or hydrogen ready, right? That's what they want to say. But I guess what you're saying is start with the 5%, 10%, and hopefully you get down the road higher, and you're not, as what Martijn was mentioning, it's not just a way to continue the life of using a coal plant, but it's actually phasing out the coal eventually.
That's right.
Or in a fast.
Because they are not building the new one, right? They are using the existing one and they are extending it, but at the same time, they are hoping that there is a new technology maturing in the meantime, so they can transition towards the new technology like LNG and hydrogen co-firing and potentially technologies like Amogy's. Yeah.
Excellent. We're running short on time, but I want to ask a final question to everybody very quickly. Let's fast forward to 2035, 10 years from now. What would help Asia cement its climate technology leadership and remain at the cutting edge of this space? Gina, let's go to you. What do you think?
I think it's going to be the partnership between the incumbents and the startup companies developing solutions regardless of where they are in the world. So it's the Asian corporates building relationships globally to access the technologies that's going to help them to achieve their goals as fast as possible. It doesn't have to be an Asian solution to an Asian problem. It should be regardless of where that is in the world. And I think the corporates in this region are really catching up. They're getting really good at open innovation, which they weren't, I would say, even 5-10 years ago.
One of the challenges that Gina alluded to for Asia, I think, is how fragmented it is, right? It's so many countries. And having been at the Ecospirity, the various conferences, this week, the key word is partnership and stakeholder engagement. And one of the things I picked up at least is the focus by the Singapore government on a grid, developing a grid within Southeast Asia. So certainly interconnectedness, I think, is going to be crucial for certainly Southeast Asia, but Asia in general.
Yeah, certainly echoing both of them, and really the collaboration, and also it doesn't have to be Asia, really across the whole globe. We want to bring in the necessary technology so that we can take the leadership of the decarbonization here. But I generally think what's happening in the US, especially because companies based in the US, we spend most of the time there. What's happening in the US now is actually giving the opportunity to Asia to become the leader, taking the leadership when it comes to decarbonization. For example, coming from like APAC summit where the new Secretary of Energy was not really talking about the decarbonization at all. But here we have a continued momentum towards the decarbonization of all the different industries. So it doesn't have to be like 2035. My honest opinion is already 2028, 9. Asia is going to be taking that leadership globally when it comes to decarbonization of the several different key industries. So I'm more hopeful and optimistic about that.
Good to hear. 2028, mark your calendars. All right, Gina, Martin, Seonghoon, thank you very much for your time. Let's give our panelists an applause. And now exit stage left. All right.